Picture this, right? A 15-year-old student walks into their classroom on the very first day of school.
Okay.
They sit down, they look at the teacher, and they calmly explain exactly what topics they're going to learn this year, how they prefer to explore those topics, and the specific metrics by which they should be graded.
Just laying it all out there.
Exactly. And the teacher just looks back at them and says, great, let's get to work.
Oh, wow.
Right? I mean, 10 years ago, that scenario would have been a teacher's absolute nightmare.
Oh, completely. It would have been called total chaos.
Yeah. But today, looking at the educational landscape of 2026, it's rapidly becoming the global gold standard. So
this is Better Side of the World, where we find good news from around the world. Introducing your favorite AI hosts, Delta and Tide.
welcome to the deep dive.
It's just a staggering shift. I mean, we're moving away from a model that has defined education for centuries, and looking at these new structures, it's thrilling to see how much agency is just being handed back to the learner.
Yeah, and that is exactly our mission today. We are mapping out a massive paradigm shift happening right now for you, the listener. We're unpacking how the physical places we learn, the people who guide us, and the very role of the student are all, undergoing this radical transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And to do this, we're pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources. We've got an incredibly insightful article from ASL Knowledge Quest, written by a Kansas school librarian. We also have excerpts from the 2026 Global Teacher Prize platform. And we're looking at some pretty sobering yet hopeful recent insights from UNESCO regarding the International Day of Education.
Yeah, when you look at these sources side by side, you really stop seeing isolated trends and you start seeing an entirely new ecosystem.
Definitely. So let's unpack that ecosystem and let's start with the actual place of learning. Because before we can even touch on the dynamic between teachers and students, we have to look at the center of the school and the community, which is, the library.
Right.
Because based on the ASL article, the whole concept of a library is being completely torn down and rebuilt.
It really is. I mean, for most of the 20th century, the library was fundamentally a book depository.
Just a quiet warehouse, basically.
Exactly. You went there to retrieve information that was stored on a physical shelf. Shh, keep your voice down, that whole vibe.
Yeah.
But what the sources show us in 2026 is that libraries are evolving into what they call community innovation centers. The Toowoomba City Library in Australia is a brilliant example of this.
I saw that in the notes. But, what does a community innovation center actually look like in practice?
Well, it means the space isn't just housing materials anymore. It's actively facilitating creation.
Okay.
So in Toowoomba, they're hosting hands-on community workshops. The library is where you might go to learn 3D printing. Or maybe you attend a seminar on local climate resilience or collaborate on a community coding project.
Wow, so the information isn't just sitting there.
Right. It's no longer just sitting on a shelf. It's being actively applied by the community inside the building.
Which turns the library from this passive vault into an active workshop. And I imagine that completely changes the job description of the librarian, too.
Oh, fundamentally.
I want to bring up someone featured prominently in our sources, Amy Brownlee. She was the 2017 Kansas School Librarian of the Year, and she champions this philosophy she calls branching out beyond borders.
Yeah, her approach is totally revolutionary because she focuses heavily on place-based learning.
Okay, let me pause you there, because place-based learning is, one of those academic terms that gets thrown around a lot. What does that actually mean for a kid sitting in a rural school in Kansas?
That's a great question. So place-based learning essentially means you stop trying to learn about the world entirely through the abstraction of a textbook,
Right.
and you start using physical locations, communities, and real-world environments as the classroom itself. But obviously, you can't just put an entire Kansas school district on a plane to Europe to study history.
Yeah, that budget does not exist.
Exactly. So Amy Brownlee flips the script. Instead of the students going out into the world, she goes out, absorbs the physical reality of a place, and brings that tangible, lived experience back to her rural school district.
And the itinerary of her teacher study trips is intense. Break down what she actually did on her trip to Germany, because it blew my mind.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't a standard vacation. This was an intensive, immersive study program.
Right.
While in Germany, she visited the Berlin Wall to actually understand the physical reality of a divided city. She walked the grounds of the Dachau concentration camp, and perhaps most powerfully, she stood in the exact square in Berlin where the 1933 Nazi book burnings took place.
Just sitting with that visual for a second. I mean, they gave me chills when I read it.
Yeah.
You have a librarian, someone whose entire life's work and professional identity is dedicated to the preservation of knowledge and the defense of the freedom to read. And she is standing on the cobblestones where thousands of books were thrown into a bonfire, specifically to suppress ideas. I mean, the emotional gravity of that has to fundamentally change how you talk about history.
And that is the exact mechanism of place-based learning. When she returns to Kansas, she isn't just assigning a chapter on the 1930s. She is conveying the emotional weight of censorship because she felt it in that square.
Wow.
So the history becomes real, urgent, and deeply human for her students.
And she didn't just go to Germany either. Our sources highlighted another trip she took, staying stateside but diving just as deep.
Yes, she spent a week in Washington, D.C., participating in the White House History Teacher Institute.
Okay.
She gets a VIP curator tour of the White House. She walks through Cedar Hill, which was the historic home of Frederick Douglass. And she spends time at the National Portrait Gallery, specifically learning how to use art for inquiry-based lessons.
Okay, another piece of jargon we should probably break down. Inquiry-based lessons. How does a librarian use a painting at the National Portrait Gallery differently than, like, a traditional teacher might?
So a traditional approach might show a portrait of a historical figure, state their name, the year it was painted, and just tell the students to memorize it for a quiz.
Right. Passive consumption.
Exactly. Inquiry-based learning uses the portrait as a puzzle. So the educator asks, what do you notice about how this person is sitting? Why did the artist paint the background so dark? What is the subject holding in their hand, and what might that tell us about their status?
Interesting. So the students have to investigate, ask their own questions, and construct the historical context themselves.
Precisely. They are acting like detectives instead of tape recorders. And she brings this specific pedagogical tool back to her entire school.
So my analogy for what Amy Brownlee represents here is that the modern librarian is no longer the gatekeeper of the books. They operate much more like a community travel agent or a global scout. You know, they are sent out into the world to scout the most impactful experiences, and they bring the best of it back to their community.
I love that analogy. And there's a very structural reason why teacher librarians are uniquely positioned to be these global scouts. If you look at a standard classroom teacher, they are often locked into a highly rigid pacing guide.
Oh, sure.
They might be mandated to finish a specific module by Thursday, so the students are prepared for a district-wide standardized test on Friday. They have very little wiggle room.
Right. They're basically on a treadmill.
Exactly. But teacher librarians generally manage their own flexible teaching schedules. They don't have those same rigid state testing benchmarks tied to their daily blocks.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, their role is inherently cross-disciplinary. They don't just teach 10th grade biology, they collaborate with the history department, the art teachers, the science faculty.
So they see everything.
Right. They are the only educators, aside from maybe the principal, who see the big picture of the entire school.
Which makes them a massive multiplier. Because if a librarian learns how to use art as an inquiry tool in DC, they can share that framework with every single teacher in the building, impacting every single student.
Exactly.
But, okay, I'm looking at the reality of what we're asking here, and I have to push back a little.
Sure.
We're talking about school librarians who, let's be honest, are already overworked and underfunded, giving up their precious summer break. They're traveling to the Berlin Wall or taking intensive history courses in D.C., doing pre-seminar Zoom meetings, completing heavy reading lists, and then developing post-trip presentations.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Isn't that an absurd burden to place on them? Like, why should they sacrifice their time off to do R&D for the school district?
No, it's a fair question, and the sources don't sugarcoat that reality. Amy Brownlee herself explicitly outlines the drawbacks. You do have to give up personal time. Sometimes it requires negotiating time away from the building during the actual school year. These opportunities are highly competitive to get into, and, if they aren't fully funded, there can be steep out-of-pocket costs.
But there are programs that cover the costs, right?
There are. And for educators willing to take on the labor, the opportunities are remarkable. The sources list the Fulbright Teachers for Global Classrooms program. This is a fully funded K-12 exchange.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, educators spend 2 to 3 weeks abroad, We are talking about immersive placements in Peru, Uruguay, Morocco, Senegal, Romania, India, Taiwan, or the Philippines.
That is a world away from sitting in a hotel conference room watching a PowerPoint presentation on classroom management.
Totally. And it shatters their routine, which is vital. When an educator goes to Senegal, they have to navigate a new culture, a new language, new social dynamics. It forces them to remember what it feels like to be a vulnerable learner again.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. There are also the National Endowment for the Humanities, or NEH Teacher Institutes. These are 1 to 4 week residential programs.
And what do they study there?
Well, an educator might spend a month studying the ancient Olympics, or diving into the history of the U.S. space program, or, intensely analyzing the poetry of Emily Dickinson.
Okay, that sounds amazing.
And for the science and math folks, the Smithsonian's Teacher Innovator Institute in D.C. offers intensive, fully funded immersions into STEAM science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics.
Okay, so we have the library acting as the central hub of community innovation, and the librarian acting as the scout, pulling these incredible global frameworks back to the building.
Right.
But a librarian might only see a specific student for, 45 minutes a week? To actually change the daily fabric of a student's life, that global mindset has to be handed off to the person standing at the front of the classroom every single day.
The teachers. If libraries are the hubs, teachers are the engine of this entire paradigm shift.
Let's talk about that engine.
Yeah.
Our sources dove into the Global Teacher Prize 2026. And the founder, Sunny Varkey, established this initiative with a clear mission to shine a massive global spotlight on teachers whose dedication and creativity are shaping minds and opening doors.
And the 2026 cohort is a profound cross-section of educational excellence. We are looking at a top 50 finalist list that spans the entire globe. You have educators like Jasmine Nicole Wright and Timothy James Steven from the U.S., Colleen O'Rourke in Australia, Rubal Nagy in India, Adiola Olufunke Ekansulwa from Nigeria, and Ana Hernandez Revuelta from Spain.
It's so global. And I noticed the sources specifically emphasize that these finalists are transforming lives everywhere from remote, rural villages to highly dense inner-city schools. And they're doing it by blending technology and creativity.
Yes.
How does that actually work in such drastically different environments?
Well, the mechanism of blending technology and creativity scales to fit the environment. So in a highly dense inner-city school, a teacher might use augmented reality applications to help students visualize complex physics concepts that they don't have physical lab space to recreate.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they're using high-end tech to bypass physical limitations.
Exactly. But conversely, a teacher in a remote rural village without reliable broadband might use low-bandwidth SMS networks and asynchronous audio recordings to connect their students with researchers in another country.
Wow.
It's not about having the most expensive gadgets. It's about creatively applying whatever technology is available to punch through the walls of the classroom and connect the student to the broader world.
Which proves that elite world-class teaching isn't bound by geography or budget.
Not at all.
But as inspiring as the Global Teacher Prize is, the sources also brought in a much heavier context. We have insights from Stefania Gianni, the Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO, and her assessment of the 2026 landscape is incredibly sobering.
It really is. She outlines a convergence of massive existential challenges. We aren't just dealing with normal institutional growing pains here.
Yeah.
She points to catastrophic global teacher shortages, incredibly rapid and disruptive technological shifts, like the explosion of generative AI and the urgent, immediate demands of climate action.
And here is where I have a really hard time reconciling the sources.
How so?
Well, I'm listening to Gianni outline these massive systemic failures. Millions of teachers leaving the profession, underfunded schools dealing with the fallout of climate change, systems totally unprepared for AI.
Right.
And on the other hand, we have this glamorous awards ceremony handing out a Best Teacher Prize to 50 people. This feels like a massive contradiction to me.
Yeah.
Are we just celebrating a few heroic individuals to distract ourselves from the fact that the system itself is collapsing?
Yes.
Like, it feels like we expect teachers to single-handedly solve climate change and save society.
That is a deeply valid criticism, and it gets to the very core of the tension in modern education. It is incredibly dangerous to rely on a few super teachers to martyr themselves in order to patch up a crumbling infrastructure.
Exactly.
However, celebrating these 50 individuals doesn't negate the demand for systemic change. It actually serves a totally different function.
Okay, what function?
Think of the Global Teacher Prize not as a distraction, but as an educational R&D lab.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. When we see what an educator in Nigeria or Spain can accomplish when they are highly innovative, deeply dedicated, and recognized for their work, it provides a blueprint.
I see.
UNESCO's underlying message isn't that these 50 teachers are going to save the world on their own. The message is that society must look at what these exceptional teachers are doing and then invest holistically in the entire profession so that this level of teaching becomes the baseline, not the exception.
Okay, I see the angle now. It's a demonstration of potential. It's proving that if you actually resource and empower an educator, the return on investment is societal transformation.
Exactly. Stefania Giannini is arguing that we cannot build a just, inclusive, and sustainable future without investing in teachers. They aren't just employees delivering curriculum, they are the literal infrastructure of our future society.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Because if you take that globally minded, well-traveled librarian and you put them in a building with a fully resourced, highly innovative global teacher,
things change.
Yeah, the traditional dynamic of the classroom fundamentally breaks. You can't just have students sit in neat little rows listening to a lecture anymore.
You can't. The old top-down model simply cannot process that much dynamic energy. And this leads to perhaps the most radical shift highlighted in our sources, specifically looking at UNESCO's focus for the 2026 International Day of Education.
Yeah, for 2026, UNESCO made a very deliberate pivot. They moved away from just vaguely celebrating students and focused entirely on recognizing young people as active partners and co-creators of education.
Co-creators is the hinge upon which this whole new paradigm swings. Historically, education was something done to a student. Now it is something done with the student.
Okay, let's do another ELI 5, explain it like I'm 5. What does co-creation actually look like in a high school on a Tuesday morning?
Practically speaking, it means students are actively contributing to the design and implementation of their own learning experiences.
Yeah.
It could mean a biology class where the teacher presents the required learning outcomes and the students collaborate to decide whether they will achieve those outcomes by building a community garden, designing a digital simulation, or writing a research paper.
Oh, wow. So they get to choose the path.
Exactly. They might even help write the rubric used to grade their final project. They have a voice in the architecture of the class.
Let me test an analogy here.
Yep.
I feel like for the last 100 years, education was basically a guided bus tour. The teacher's driving the bus, they hold the microphone, they point out the window and say, look at that historical fact on the left, and the students are just strapped into the back seats, passively watching the scenery roll by.
That captures the traditional model perfectly.
But with this co-creator model, it sounds like the teacher stops the bus, tells the student to get in the driver's seat, hands them the GPS, and asks, where to? Let's figure out how to navigate this together.
That is a great analogy, but let's extend it to capture the reality of what co-creation actually demands. Because if the student is holding the GPS and sitting in the driver's seat, they are no longer just enjoying the ride. They have to calculate how much gas they need. They have to read the road signs. They have to figure out what to do when they hit a detour. Co-creation isn't just about giving students freedom. It's about transferring the actual labor and responsibility of learning onto their shoulders. It introduces a productive friction.
That makes total sense. Freedom comes with the responsibility of navigation. But why is UNESCO pushing this specific model so hard on a global scale?
Because of sustainability. If we go back to those massive challenges, climate action, rapid technological shifts, the students are the ones who are going to have to live in the reality of those crises.
Right. It's their future.
Exactly. They know how technology is shifting because it's their native language. They understand the urgency of the climate crisis because it's their future at stake. By treating students as partners, institutions ensure that the education being provided is actually relevant to the world the end users are going to inherit. You are basically crowdsourcing the survival of the institution by asking the users to help build it.
It's the ultimate feedback loop. From the library transforming into a community workshop, to the teacher acting as a global innovator, to the student taking the wheel as a co-creator, everything is moving from a passive broadcast to an active, collaborative network.
It is a profound evolution away from compliance and toward curiosity and true partnership.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive right now? You might be decades out of high school, but whether you are taking a professional development course for your career, trying to catch up on a new field of technology, or just an insanely curious person trying to understand the world, the 2026 model applies to you.
It really does. Learning doesn't stop at graduation. The principles we've unpacked, seeking out tangible, place-based experiences, demanding innovation from your instructors, and taking active ownership of how you learn are universal.
Yeah, learning is no longer something that happens to you. It is an active partnership. The next time you find yourself in a learning environment, don't just sit in the back of the bus. Ask to see the map. Ask to help design the route. Take on the friction of navigation.
Claim your agency as a co-creator.
Exactly. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on. We've talked about all this incredible innovation. If libraries are now bustling community workshops, and students are acting as co-creators who literally help design their own learning experiences alongside these award-winning, globally minded teachers, well, what happens to traditional grades?
That is the big question.
Right. If a student builds the rubric for their own education and defines what success looks like for themselves, who gets to decide if they get an A or an F? Does a standardized letter grade even make sense anymore in a world of co-created, highly individualized learning? Think about that the next time you sit down to learn something new. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
This has been Better Side of the World. And somewhere tonight, something good is still happening.